one of the other definitions for Dhamma or Dharma is nature, life, order of things. It's like a fish looking around itself in the water, saying, where's the water? Point me at the water molecules. That's the Dharma for us. Everywhere you look. You see, earlier I was playing with the cable as I was disentangling it. You see the mind there. Years ago when I used to chew gum, and you have to, take it later on and you have to, or toss it into the trash bin. And sometimes, or especially, that's the worst part, when you step on one, especially if it's hot outside, the ground is hot, that melts the gum and your shoe touches it, and good luck removing it. And everywhere you go, it's like, ting, ting, it sticks. Does that remind you of something? Sankharas are like that. Habitual tendencies are like that. Habits, bad habits, things that you want to get rid of, but it's still stuck on one finger. You think you got rid of it, but then you look, it's on the other finger. So we have to be able to see the Dharma or the Dhamma in our lives. Everywhere we look, it's there. It's in your relationship with yourself, with things, with your job, your partner, your wife, your husband, your parents, your children, your neighbor, your landlord, your car, the bus driver, you name it. Today's talk, today's sutta rather, is on a very important sutta. It comes again from the Samyutta Nikaya, the connected discourses. It deals with subject matter, a key formula in the practice, in the patipada, which we call, well, the Dhamma is patipada. It's a path, it's a training, it's a practice, it's a doing in that sense. You can't sit there and wait for things to happen on their own. At the very least, you need to look at the sankharas. You need to look at your involvement with life, your relationship to your suffering. That you always think that it's coming from the outside, from that person over there, from that relative over there in my past. My grandmother used to abuse me, my uncle used to, my father, my mother, my teacher. We had a principal at our school. I used to go to a evangelical school, Protestant. And we had well, almost all the teachers had a special degree in punitive measures, in beating up people. Fancy word, punitive measures. But especially, the principal apparently had a special, yes, master, special, with a specialty in choosing a certain type of a cane, which was no longer a cane. It was more of like I used to resemble it to what bakers used to use to flip. They still use it, dough, flattened dough. But his was a little bit narrower, but thicker. And it was long, longer than, well, about this size, and then it had the handle. And he would walk around the campus with that. So you make sure that you stay in the classroom and you don't do anything where the teacher will send you outside. Well, sometimes, especially on Mondays, we had to make sure that our nails were cut nicely. Well, sometimes because we had to rush to get ourselves to the school, and there was 3 of us at the time, my older brother, my sister, and myself. And by the time that my mother used to get the food ready, this and that, and for us to rush downstairs with the lunchbox to run a few streets to get to the corner of the street to get the bus, because we didn't want to have our father come, and missing the bus would mean that my father had to spend money. We didn't have a car. He had to go find us a cab, a taxi, which would cost money, which would set him back from his work. So a lot of bad effects would happen if we didn't rush out. So sometimes I would forget to clip my nails. And they weren't like long, you know, not like Wolverine. It was just like a little bit left. So it had to do a lot with the teacher's mood from the night before. So if she saw that your nails so happened to be a little bit longer than what she would have liked, out you go. Even if you were a straight A student, and my grades were very good at the time, she would still send us along with the rest. So there would be 6 of us, 10 of us, 16 of us waiting in line, dreading. Talk about trauma, right? Trauma. People don't realize how that is devastating. So we would wait, and then lo and behold, we would just pray that something would have happened to him and he's at home. His car broke down, he didn't show up, but he would be there. Especially the days that I would be outside. And he would come and he would say, open it up, open, open. And we knew what he meant. Open your palm. And we had to raise the hand up. And he would beat it. He would take, you know, there would be a momentum, and he would strike. And if he really didn't like you, he would flip it to the side, and he would hit you like that. And if he really, really didn't like you, he would tell you to turn your hand this way. And he would hit the knuckles, phalanges, all these things. Terrible idea. You might ruin the person's function of their hand for life. I'm not even talking about the emotional. Where did this come from? Like, how did this start again? What was I? Children, trauma. I knew there was a reason why I brought this up. Sometimes I guess Alzheimer's is kicking in, finally. It'll come to me. So, the Bojjhangas have a lot to do with giving us the keys for awakening, to understand why we do the things that we do and what to do to get out of them. Earlier I was talking about the gum. The stories we hold on to. What we typically call in the Dhamma, in this path, upadana. Sometimes it's the nice, clean English word for it is clinging. It almost looks silvery, nice, shiny, clinging. Yay, it's clinging. But it's not. It has a grabbing action to it. We hold on to things. We latch on to things. Even something as sublime as the Dhamma can turn into something that we hold on to. And when we talk about it to other people and we glorify it by saying, well, you don't understand, it's the Dhamma that I'm grabbing onto. So that should be permissible, that should be excusable, but it's not. Lord Buddha would discourage even people from worshipping him. There was a bhikkhu named Vakkali. He would just be mesmerized. He would sit close to Lord Buddha and he would just spend the whole day and night just observing Lord Buddha's features. It was like, oh, I can't believe I'm here. Just. So Lord Buddha's patience ran out because he was not practicing, this person. He had left his family, his wife, his children, his business. He had become a bhikkhu because he was so mesmerized, taken by Lord Buddha's features. And Lord Buddha tells him, what is it that you're attracted to? What is it that you're worshipping? This bag of excrement, he says. Bag of excrement. You know what excrement is, right? And he is shocked. He feels rejected. And he rushes out of there to the point where he wants to commit suicide. He wants to throw himself off of the cliff in Vidya Peaks, Vulture's Peak, if you ever heard of it. If you're going to be joining us on the pilgrimage, it will be on the list of places to see. It's a lovely place to be. At that moment, Lord Buddha appears in front of him, gives him advice. And Venerable Vakkali takes the advice. He doesn't waste time. I try to bring in these episodes from the life of Lord Buddha and his students so that you see the story, you feel the story, you feel the relatedness with your life. You don't treat the Dhamma as some book, some Nikaya, some story, or something that you have to have a degree in order for you to really appreciate. No, a story like this can move you deeply, enough so that you can attain Nibbana. That's why Venerable Vakkali, he did attain Nibbana. And Lord Buddha always used that because he lacked wisdom in his confidence, in his saddha of Lord Buddha. He lacked wisdom. He just adored Lord Buddha. Well, it doesn't work like that. You're doing worship. But because Lord Buddha brought in the element of wisdom and taught him how to apply confidence, that's why he was known as the foremost in having faith and confidence in Lord Buddha, Venerable Vakkali. Because Lord Buddha had a list of 80 bhikkhus who were the foremost in something. He was that. He was the foremost among all the other bhikkhus. So that's one of the reasons why we share these stories, to inspire us. And that's one of the qualities that we must have to keep bringing life to the Dhamma, so it generates. Otherwise, the Dhamma by itself is just a series of words. They mean nothing if you're not prepared. It's like the food that you buy in the market. Rice that you buy. Can you eat the rice like that? It's great, it's dry. You're going to get sick, you're going to be taken to the hospital. They need to flush out your stomach. But there's a way of preparing it, and then it becomes delicious food. That's another way of looking at the Dhamma. So don't expect it to be like ready-made, like McDonald's, fast food. No, that's cheapening the Dhamma. And earlier we were talking about blindly following some rites and rituals, or what others have told us. Blindly, we follow them. That is the equivalent of fast food, which doesn't work. So here we are going to address the Bojjhangas, or sometimes called Sambojjhangas or Satta Bojjhangas. Satta means 7. And this one comes out of the first out of 3. They are back to back. That's why they are placed there, because they are connected suttas. Connected because we have a series of 3 suttas. Sometimes they're called Gilana Sutta. Gilana, think of it as sick, being sick. And it has to do with sickness. So here we have Venerable Mahakassapa, The sutta following this, Dutiya Gilana Sutta, is Venerable Mahamoggallana who is sick. Imagine that. Venerable Mahamoggallana, the greatest, only second to Lord Buddha in his psychic abilities. That's how powerful he was. He also was sick. But when you get to the Tatiya Gilana Sutta, that's when Lord Buddha is sick. And Mahachunda, Venerable Mahachunda goes to recite to him the 7 factors of awakening, the 7 Bojjhangas. Well, what are the Bojjhangas? These are factors of awakening that are necessary if you want to attain Nibbana. You cannot not use them. You need to use them. But I would love for you to use some of the things that we talked about yesterday for as far as the Salayatanang and especially the fetter. Remember the 2 oxen, the white and the black? One is not controlling the, one is not fettering, binding the other. What was the thing that was fettering? What was the binding agent? The yoke. And what was the point of using those 2 oxen? What was one ox representing? For example, the sense organ of the eye. And if it's the eye, then the other ox would be visual object. Similarly with the ear, with the nose. Okay, I would love for you to think about those when we are covering these suttas, because as I said again and again, I try not to choose suttas randomly. They have to build on each other. They have to help each other. So when we're talking about the Sambojjhangas, please bear that in mind. So using the eye as an example, and an object, let's say an apple. So here's the eye organ, we call it organ, and here's the form or rupa. Unfortunately, what we often do is we put a relationship between the seeing and the object. So now we're no longer talking about the apple. We are talking about my relationship to the apple. I really love this apple. Oh, I can't stand these apples. What is that? What happened? The apple was there, minding its own business. Suddenly, I have a relationship to it. If I see it, I'm going to kick it. What happened? It didn't do anything to me. I added stories. So that is where we come with what we call sannyas. Typically, sannyas are described by English translators as perception. I think that's a very simplistic term. It's more than just perception. I like to think of them as memories, mental associations, which encompasses a lot more than just mere perception. It gives you a better idea, something you can touch almost. So sanya of what? Sanya of, for example, dosa, hatred. Or yesterday, someone said patigha. It could be lobha, greed, or even raga. So these things will cloud the fact that there is a seeing going on. What? Just a seeing. That's it. Seeing. But majority of our lives is more than what the Salayatanans are giving us. It's what this thing is doing for me, to me. Sometimes people are thrown into concentration camps where they know they will be killed. Majority of the people who are prisoners with them, they're extremely sad, waiting for death. Or every millisecond is morbid. Every single second is terrorizing. Plus there's death waiting. And then you find those unique people, one or two, maybe one, that will say, okay, it still is not that bad. Even though they're going to die, they will find something for them to be hopeful about. So that is where you will take the reality and morph it, change it to something that will be constructive for you. That's why whenever people around me were like panicking, freaking out over the last 2.5 years, I've been trying to show them that this is actually something good. At the very least, it's allowing you to do some retreats on your own. And it's also reevaluating your relationship with your body and with the principles that we keep talking about, such as anicca, and your relationship to this thing, which is going to be tossed into the trash can eventually, burned. Oh, I want to save it. Why? What's so big deal about this? It has a purpose. Eventually it dies. We all know that. So what's the whole fuss about? So already you feel calmer. You're like, okay, it's not so bad. But you're living in a world that is feeding more and more terror and panic. That's why people get sick. It's because of that, because your immune system drops when you start thinking negatively. Your sannyas are that powerful. Ask any advertising agency, they employ one, at the very least, one psychologist. They didn't just start this, they've been doing this for over 100 years. So they will grab your emotions and accordingly sell you products that you don't need. But you end up thinking that, I need this, I need this. If I don't get this car, then I want to die. Something like that. So sannyas are the big problem here, because they come and cloud what's in front of you. These are basically, what I'm describing here is teaching you the art of becoming a mirror. Art of becoming a mirror. Have you ever stood in front of a mirror? Now, you might be beautiful, you might be ugly, but the moment you step away from the mirror doesn't say to itself or to the other mirrors, do you believe this? He was so ugly, she was so ugly. Like, you know, the mirror doesn't do that. It was simply reflecting while you stood in front of it. That's it. You step away, end of story. But how many of us can do that? An arahant can. Lord Buddha did. Why? Because sanya is no longer dominating the mind. There's a beautiful phrase, sentence from the suttas. Sanya virattassa nasanti gantha panya vimuttassa nasanti moha. Which means, when one is no longer attached to sannyas, there cannot be any more bonds, fetters, tying up, shackling up business. None of that. Similarly, for the person who has liberated oneself through wisdom, sanya vimuttassa nasanti moha, there cannot be any more delusions. So that tells us of what Lord Buddha's constantly reminding us of, don't underestimate the power of sanya. So whenever you come to interviews saying, Bhante, this is what's happening, but you have to understand, he did this to me, she did this to me, da, 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 da. That's the story. In Buddhist terms, when we're talking about story, we're talking about sannyas. So I say this, I'm emphasizing this this much because oftentimes people have this formulaic, repetitive mechanism in their mind, thinking that I know Dhamma. Well, how? What do you know about Dhamma? Well, I can list the Pancha Khandas, yes, aggregates. Who cares? What does that do? Nama Rupa, yes. Vedana, yes. Sanya, yes. Sankhara, yes. Vijnana, yes. Okay, what did that change in you? Do you know what you listed? Did that add to the understanding? So that's one of the reasons why we have to just walk away from just blindly repeating things. Even repeating things from teachers that we respect, including the Buddha. We have to understand what it is. I see a lot of people just repeating some teachers' statements, this and that, and thinking, yes, I'm a follower of this Ajahn, this Bhante. Is like, okay, so what? Did that increase the depth of understanding of the Dhamma in you? If it didn't, well, guess what? You need some work on yourself. So sanya. I say this because this is directly related with what we're about to talk about, the Satta Bojjhangas, the 7 factors of awakening. After all, the sutta is on that. Now, this is such a powerful tool, the 7 factors of awakening, that again and again we see in the suttas how Lord Buddha emphasizes how it is impossible to attain Nibbana without accessing, using the functionality of the 7 factors of awakening. So what are they? So we have sati, we have Dhammavichaya. What else? What else? Piti. What else? Yes. What else? And okay. So you have how many? 7. Not 6, 7. Now, what I like to use here is an image, because before we learned how to use words, we've been more, the brain is more acclimated towards using imagery. Imagery. If I say elephant, you don't see in your mind the letters E-L-E-P-H-A-N-T. You see elephant, some part of an elephant. That's how the human brain functions. So similarly, images can take a concept and really develop into something that has more depth, especially towards our understanding. So here I'm going to draw I don't know if the red does a good job. So what I'm trying to draw here is a seesaw. You know what a seesaw is? As kids, we would be on one and just go one side, just trying to balance things. Almost like, like a pendulum almost. So when we look at the Satta Bojjhangas, we need to understand their relationship to each other. Okay, so we will look at, we'll start with Dhammavichaya. I'll abbreviate it as DV. Then we have Vidya. Then we have Piti. Then we have Passaddhi. Then we have Samadhi. Then we have Upekkha. And in the center we have sati. But sati, why is it in the middle? Anyone? It balances. Sati is like the foreman. Sati is like the captain. Sati is the one that says, okay, what's going on over there? There's too much of this. Lift it up, and I need to add more of this. Earlier today I was mentioning to some of you how there's too much virya, or not enough. Usually when we're meditating, especially on a retreat, especially on the first few days, we put a lot of virya. I'm going to get this. I'm going to get to the first jhana. Yes, I'm going to do this. I'm going to sit through this even if my knees break. Wrong attitude. What that means is, the seesaw, you're actually top heavy on the virya department. And when you're top heavy, when you're coming down on that much, too much on that side, this side goes up. Now, something else has to be said about these groupings. If you notice, I deliberately placed 3 of these on this side, meaning Dhammavichaya, Virya, and Piti, and Passaddhi, Samadhi, and Upekkha on the other side. Because each of these groups stands for something. They have a certain character. Piti, just like Virya, just like Dhammavichaya, has more of a heating quality to it. It's more energizing. It's more enlivening. It gives you a nice kick in the you-know-what to get you on the right track. Okay, so think of that. I'll write it in red, so kind of heating quality. So energizing. And cooling, we'll use the blue. This one would be more calming. Now I gave the example of someone using too much virya. Well, could there be something that demonstrates the opposite quality? Anyone? What's the opposite of energizing? It's on the board. Calming, yes. So calming, too much of that means you're going to fall asleep. Are you familiar with that? The head's drooping in meditation. Sloth and torpor, right? Tinhamidha, laziness, drowsiness. Too much pasadhi, too much, means you're going to fall asleep. Or you're going to get bored. Which is another reason why we lose interest and we fall asleep. So what do? Balance them out, exactly. Just like in chemistry, just like in math, any physics equation, you have to balance it out. Right? You have the product, you have the component parts. Same thing. But how do we do it? Who is the thing, which part is going to tell us, hey, there's too much of this here versus there? What? Sati. That's why Lord Buddha used sati in different formulas. You have sati in the Attangika Magga, Noble Eightfold Path. You have sati in the Pancha Indriya, the 5 spiritual faculties. You have sati here in the Satta Bojjhangas. So the Lord Buddha was onto something. Right? It's the key. That's one of the reasons why if you have sati with you all the time, I tell you again and again, hold the hand of sati like a caring parent to your child. Never let go. If you keep and protect sati, sati will protect you. Don't forget that. Because sati is the thing which is going to bring you anya. Make sense? You see how it's, everyone, like we understand this. Yeah, it makes sense. What's there not to understand? So this is one of the reasons why it's extremely important to remind ourselves of the power of the 7 factors of awakening and how applicable they are. So, but is there a way that we can see more of its functionality in our day-to-day lives, especially in reference to the practice of meditation? Yeah. Dhammavichaya, by the way, in case you're completely unfamiliar with this, sati is mindfulness. Beyond just, mindfulness in English is very poor of a term to describe the fullness, the complexity of sati. It allows you to just have the awareness to stay with an object as it moves from one state to the next. So satipatthana is a perfect example. You might be staying with the object of the body, the breath. But as you're carrying over your mindfulness, your awareness, suddenly, because your sati is so strong, you're noticing the nuances of Vedana coming in. You're noticing how something in you is not sitting well because someone showed up from the corner of your eye. Someone said something or you heard something. What is that? That's displeasure, hatred even maybe. So now, instead of just being focused on the breath, you're watching without any interruptions. Mindfulness is there even though the emphasis changed from the body to the feeling. So you're always engaged. There's nothing to be bored about. Remember yesterday I said anicca can take you, the understanding of anicca can take you to nibbana if you know how to use it. So sati. Next we get to Dhammavichaya, which is, think of it as investigation, not necessarily of just the Dhammas, but investigation of mind objects. That's a big, term that takes within it, it's an umbrella of all kinds of mind objects. Meaning, could be images in the mind, thoughts, principles of the Dhamma. Dhamma in this case, it doesn't necessarily mean Lord Buddha's teachings, Buddhism, suttas, not just that. It's a wide, it's a term that encompasses a lot. So, mind objects. Lord Buddha says, if you know your mind objects, if the mind recognizes the objects that pass through it, the mind awakens. Unfortunately, we are not awake to them. Because what's happening in the mind are a series of, oftentimes, what look like random ideas, thoughts, perceptions. Sannyas, remember sannyas? There's kusala and akusala sannyas. There's kusala and akusala mind objects. So we're creating a finesse, an understanding of what is beneficial to me and what is not. And the more you do have a cognizance, an understanding of how to use this, automatically you start deselecting the akusala. You stay away from anything that is unhealthy. When you get those addictive, negative, emotional cycles happening, instead of becoming a victim to them as you've always done and then complained about, now you see it before it hits you. You see it coming over the horizon and say, oh, okay, I see you. Passes by. You don't stand in its way for it to slam into you. And then, conversely, you choose whatever is kusala. That's why we study the suttas. Because there's a lot of kusala behavior there demonstrated, at the very least in the lives of the Arya Savakas. Okay? So, mind objects are to be seen, investigated. That's the second. Virya is the energy, the effort that we put in. Now, the interesting thing is that as we put more and more energy, by the way, we're putting more and more energy because we're seeing what's really happening in the background. We're like, I see what's happening. That's Dhammavichaya. Dhammavichaya. So if you know what's happening, what do? You trust it more and you put more energy. Okay, you put more energy, guess what? Because you're putting in more energy, you're investing more energy into it, suddenly piti, spiritual joy, happens. This is a different kind of joy than your normal joy that you get from winning the lottery, finding hidden treasure, or getting to your goals, because those things could come and go. This one doesn't. It keeps growing inside of you. It unlayers itself. It adds more flavor to your life. And you go more and more, deeper and deeper into the spiritual life, whatever that means. For yourself, it will have a different meaning than ever before. Then we get to, because you have joy, too much of it, what does that mean? Energizing. Well, too much of it, sati is going to come, hey, calm down. Calm down. Because this is where, if you put too much energy into your practice, you are simply going to create restlessness. It's unavoidable. That's why people come and say, but Bhante, you told me that I'm not putting enough energy. I'm putting now a lot more energy. And I say, that's the problem. You're putting too much energy. There is such a thing as a sweet spot, you know? We need to balance. And Satta Bojjhangas is all about balance. So, even piti, it says, oh, okay, back off a little bit. Back off. And that's why when a person gets into the first jhana or the second jhana, I have to encourage them, okay, it's not a big deal. You don't have to be attached to it. Enjoy it as it lasts, but keep the door open for other possibilities and be humble, because you didn't know that was coming and now it's here. You're enjoying it, but keep the door open for other good things to show up. So there's more trust developing between the teacher and the student, or especially between oneself and one's own expectation as to what's about to happen. As they do so, there's more tranquility. And when a person is experiencing this kind of spiritual joy and they are being guided properly, then there is the calm, the tranquility that happens. That's not something that you would see in normal so-called joy experiences. With this, it does happen. It always happens. And that is basically a telltale sign that something is about to happen. And that something is samadhi, collectedness of mind. The mind comes to a point of stability. Everything opens up. That's what you want to get to. That's why I disagree with people who still use it arrogantly in the English language when they translate samadhi into this poor term. Concentration. It's much more than that. Because you cannot gain wisdom from mere concentration. It's impossible. Because wisdom requires you to have an open view. It's like a peripheral vision. You see what's happening. Concentration is like very pinpointed, needle-like, precise, one very narrow look at partial, tiny little window You even call it reality. There's so much more happening. That's samadhi for you. But you cannot experience samadhi without experiencing passaddhi. Okay? And because of samadhi, samadhi basically prepares the mind, establishes the mind in equanimity. That's why equanimity can never be indifference, because it has all of these other components in it. And it works very closely, in close association with sati. That's why oftentimes upekkha is considered the element of wisdom in the Satta Bojjhangas. If you notice, there's no panya listed as panya. It's in equanimity. It's in upekkha. Okay? So I wanted to share these thoughts before we jump into exploring the suttas. So this is coming from the Samyutta Nikaya, the Connected Discourses. It is from the Mahavagga Samyutta section within the Samyutta Nikaya. It has many branchings. It has many subgroupings. That's why it can be very confusing at times. And it is it has two names. You can think of it as having two different designations, depending on which resource you're looking into. Here I've translated as Kassapa Bojjhanga Sutta. Kassapa Bojjhanga Sutta. Kassapa and the 7 factors of awakening. Sometimes they're called the enlightening factors of enlightening. I don't like to use the word enlightening. I think it's very Victorian or, ancient, antiquated term. Awakening still has some dignity in it, I think. It's a little bit more noble, I think. Or the other term would be Patama Gilana Sutta. Patama means the first, part 1, versus Dutiya Gilana Sutta, or Tatiya, meaning the third discourse on being or getting sick. So as I said in the beginning, this is about the incident where Venerable Mahakassapa was sick. And there's a place which it will be on the pilgrimage trail. There is a place in Rajghat, modern-day Rajgir, where the bhikkhus used to go, the arahants would go for their nightly hot spring. It's like there's jacuzzi to cool their bodies and to relax, because they had to walk a lot per day. So fortunately, those hot springs are still available. And there's a section when you go there on the way up to the caves where they actually had this first council. But before you get to that, right after you pass the hot springs, which has now 2 sections to it, one for common people, common I say because the entrance fee is very cheap. I think it's like 1 or 10 rupees, which is nothing. But and that is the one that you see being quite crowded. And then you have the one that costs, I think I was told, 100 rupees, and you only see 1 or 2 people in there. Next to that, someone had actually constructed a huge Buddha statue in white. As you go up the trail, you get to see it, and it's quite lovely, especially before sunrise. As you're going up, maybe 100 feet up the hill, you get to a platform, a plateau area, and that is where the cave or kuti of Venerable Mahakassapa was. So I'm giving you that background story so you can get in your mind the mental vision of, or image of rather, of where these things happen, because these things did happen somewhere to people on this planet Earth. So, this is sutta number from the Samyutta Nikaya, sutta number 46.14, Kassapa Bojjhanga Sutta. This is what I personally heard. Once, while the Blessed One was living near Rajagha at the bamboo forest by the squirrel's feeding ground, the Venerable Mahakassapa, who at the time was also staying in Rajagha, but in the Pipali cave, became physically sick and was now suffering much as a result of his illness. Then, having come out of his seclusion in the early evening hours, the Blessed One went and visited the Venerable Mahakassapa. So, sometimes people misunderstand when they hear or read something like that, and especially in regards to a bhikkhu going on Pindapada or eating lunch, coming back from Pindapada, eating lunch, eating his alms food, that now it's time for their siesta. No. Unless the bhikkhu is very sick or old or something. But we usually have to be engaged in some form of chankama, walking meditation. Because you have to digest the food, you know. One of the worst things to do is just to lie down after eating a whole bunch of food. Even though they might have walked at least 2 kilometers. 1 kilometer to go to the village, 1 kilometer to come back. So when we see or hear about Lord Buddha coming out of his seclusion, he wasn't coming out of his nap or sleep. He's coming out of his meditation retreat that he was conducting on himself in seclusion in his kuti. So he would spend several hours and then he would come out. And usually, especially in summertime, in India, it's very hot. So when the sun goes down, it's very hot still. But still, it's more bearable. So you see this phrase a lot. That's why I mentioned it. So the Blessed One went and visited the Venerable Mahakassapa and sat down on the seat made ready for him. And that's another phrase that we see in suttas. The seat ready made for him. The great disciples of Lord Buddha, especially the chief disciples, would always have an extra seat specially reserved for Lord Buddha, just in case the master would show up. And sometimes he would just appear, sometimes he would just be walking after having walked several miles. You can tell that they were also eager to get a visit from the teacher because it was a tremendous honor. And just in case Lord Buddha would show up. And so that's what's happening. So he comes and sits down on the seat made ready for him. Once seated, the Blessed One then addressed the Venerable Mahakassapa by saying, "Kassapa, I hope you're keeping well. How are you feeling now? Are you feeling better? Are the painful feelings you're experiencing getting less or more severe? I hope it is the ending of the painful feelings that you are noticing, not their increase." Lord Buddha had Mahakaruna, great compassion. And I don't care how advanced you are, when you get a visit from your teacher, especially someone who comes asking for your help to see how you're doing, it's beyond words how beautiful that is. Plus, Lord Buddha would always remind us bhikkhus, saying, you have left your mother and father. You have each other, he says. You must take care of each other like you're each other's parents. Perfect example. You see this again and again. Bhante, I'm not keeping well at all. I'm not feeling better. And instead, I'm experiencing much suffering as the painful feelings are getting far worse. Bhante, it is the increase of the painful feelings that I'm noticing, not their decrease. And remember, they didn't have much medicine in those days. As one of the requisites, one of the 4 requisites as bhikkhus, is, to this day in some parts of India, they use it, not just India, is fermented cow urine. They would ferment the urine, and it's very smelly, as you can imagine, but if you leave it, and sometimes they would boil it until it becomes condensed, and it's almost like cream. So depending on how they use it, so that was the medicine they had for pretty much most things, because you would you would not have the facilities that a normal villager layperson would have. Of course, we had Jivaka eventually, and he was the designated GP of the Sangha, so he would always be there doing his best to help the Sangha, but and they would have different kinds of diseases. Sometimes it's just tummy cramps, or it could be headaches. Sometimes, I just took some headache medicine earlier before coming here. They didn't have that. So the intensity would be exceedingly increasing from day to day. So that's what's happening, he's saying. And then Lord Buddha straight away jumps into the instruction. Never misses an opportunity to show and share the Dhamma. Because Dhamma, one of the other attributes of the Dhamma is that it heals. It heals. If you go into the West and study medicine or anything related to medicine, including mental health, there are some words that you're not allowed to use legally. As a licensed psychotherapist in America, I am not allowed to use the word heal. No doctor is allowed to use legally the word heal or cure. I will cure you, come to me. None of that. Even if you can, you cannot say that. Why? Because legal entities have forbidden you from using that, just because of liability, not to get sued. Meanwhile, the person is being treated. Doesn't say anything, does it? I will treat you. Well, treat me to what? Coffee? What are you going to treat me to? Good dinner? That's, it's language has become a mockery. It used to mean something to use words. Now it's just lifeless. There's nothing behind it. I read an article by one Ajahn. It's supposed to be a Mahatera. And he's talking and talking, pages and pages in this article. I'm trying so hard to see what he's saying. Nothing. There's no voice. The person doesn't have a voice. Why? Because they are very integrated. They don't want to offend anyone. This morning, some people asked me very important, very direct questions, if you recall. Right? Mahayana and all that? I cannot give you quasi, pseudo, maybe, could be, it's up to you, it's how you see it kind of an answer. Where do you see that in the suttas? Lord Buddha, where do you see that? So it's shameful for us bhikkhus to use language, lifeless, backboneless, spineless language like that. But that's the world we're living in today. Sadly, we need to be careful to keep that outside the gates of Dhamma. You cannot come in to pollute and corrupt the Dhamma. We have to say no, categorical no to certain things. And for that we have Lord Buddha's example, so there's nothing to fear. Always go back. When in doubt, always check the suttas. And to check the suttas, go to the Vinayas, check those. That's what Lord Buddha said. You have two sources. And if it's not in either one, it doesn't belong there. I never said it. That's what Lord Buddha's words. Check it in the Anguttara Nikaya. He says it again and again and again. So here's where he's instructing Kassapa. Kassapa, I have taught you the 7 factors of awakening, and their benefits have been well explained by me, which, when cultivated and fully developed within oneself, lead to direct and perfect understanding, to full awakening, to Nibbana. What are these 7? The mindfulness awakening factor, Kassapa, Sati, Satta Bojjhanga, he says, has been well explained by me, which, when cultivated and fully developed within oneself, leads to direct and perfect understanding, to full awakening, to Nibbana. There's no iffy, could be, maybe this would happen language there, right? He's very clear, very definitive. If you do this, this will happen. In that sense, I have tremendous respect for science, true science. I was mentioning earlier about chemistry. You can't talk your way out of chemistry in an equation. When you're doing a chemical reaction, if you don't have the necessary items, compounds, the product is not going to be what you expect, right? If you want a water molecule, you need not 3 hydrogen molecules, you need 2. And 1 oxygen, H2O, not H3O, it's going to be something else. Not the drinkable kind that nourishes you. The Dhamma is very similar in that. It's testable in that sense. The investigation of states awakening factor, Dhammavichaya, Kassapa, has been well explained by me, which, when cultivated and fully developed within oneself, leads leads to direct and perfect understanding, to full awakening, to Nibbana. The persevering effort awakening factor, Vidya, or energy, Kassapa, has been well explained by me, which, when cultivated and fully developed within oneself, leads to direct and perfect understanding, to full awakening, to Nibbana. The joy awakening factor, Kassapa, has been well explained by me, which, when cultivated and fully developed within oneself, leads to direct and perfect understanding, to full awakening, to Nibbana. Remember, there are these words, full understanding. I still see many people having this this idea that Nibbana is a trance-like state. It's like almost like a gift from some other realm, like a trance, like a magical event, totally unconnected with the ability to discern. Remember, there's the term that Lord Buddha uses again and again, yatha bhutang pajanati. Pajanati means to know and understand. Yatha bhutang, how things come to be. You see it, as if you have just been given fresh eyes and you were blind all your life. Now you have eyes. Will your relationship with the world be different? That is what's called jnana dassana, knowledge and vision. You see, vision. Jnana dassana, to see. The tranquility of mind awakening factor, Kassapa, has been well explained by me, which, when cultivated and fully developed within oneself, leads to direct and perfect understanding, to full awakening, to Nibbana. And remember, the tranquility of mind awakening factor is preparing the mind to really go deep. Some people get stuck here and think that they've attained Nibbana because they just focus on that. So they're going, seesawing their way between, piti and passaddhi. In and out, in and out, in and out, because they enjoy the tranquility so much. And sometimes many people misconstrue this and say, oh, there was absolutely nothing. Meanwhile, the mind for the first time has reached a state of tranquility, meaning there is no noise as much as it was before. The restless mind has finally settled. But you still need work. You still need work. And there are many people out there in the world today who claim themselves to be masters at this and that, very well-known writers and things. If I name them already, you know. Bestsellers, New York bestseller list, whatever. Stuck. The collected stability of mind awakening factor, samadhi, Kassapa, has been well explained by me, which, when cultivated and fully developed within oneself, leads to direct and perfect understanding, to full awakening, to nibbana. Samadhi, in fact, many people argue that it was a word that was introduced for the first time in the world by Lord Buddha. Now remember, when in India the Dhamma disappeared, many of these terms were taken in, were adopted by whatever was available. Patanjali, you know, the one who came up with Ashtanga, Yoga Sutras of Patanjali. What is that? When you look at it, Ashtanga, what is that? Does it sound familiar? Attangika Magga, Ashtanga Marga. Thankfully, Patanjali was there to take and at least keep some form of the Dhamma alive in India when the Buddhists did not know how to appreciate it, and they disappeared in India. But the Dhamma took on a different form. Unfortunately, because their understanding of samadhi was not the same as what we're talking about here, collectedness of mind. This is why many English translators in the 19th and 20th century, to this day sadly, still use concentration for samadhi. It comes from. Because many of these scholars had actually studied Sanskrit first. They came from India to Sri Lanka when they were really intrigued when they discovered the Pali Suttas. But because of many of the terms being sounded the same, and they're like, yeah, we know Sanskrit, yes, we know. So Sanskrit and Pali is the same, right? Completely missing the whole point. So many of these terms were translated as though they were the Sanskrit terms. That's why you end up having samadhi, for example, being seen as nothing more than concentration. To this day, people use it. Well-known scholars use it. But these are not meditating practitioners. If you are, you would know that it's not concentration, plain and simple. The equanimity awakening factor, Kassapa, has been well explained by me, which, when cultivated and fully developed within oneself, leads to direct and perfect understanding, to full awakening, to nibbana. Remember, equanimity has everything to do with wisdom. It's full of life. It's not a place where you get to, you're almost like a zombie. There's no such thing. You're full of life. But you're equanimous. You're aware fully of what is happening. You can even think of it as the culmination of both sati and panya put together. Interesting combination, isn't it? These 7 factors of awakening, Kassapa, have all been well explained by me, which, when cultivated and fully developed within oneself, then lead to direct and perfect understanding, to full awakening, to nibbana. Could you look at the image over there, the seesaw I mentioned? I'm glad it's still on the board. The seesaw, it's not just going to go pushed to one side or the other, always. In order to attain awakening, full awakening, or even the first stage of awakening, there needs to come the time where they are in perfect harmony, balanced. Have you seen a pendulum or a seesaw? Sometimes it gets, especially when we used to play, you know, my cousin would be on one side and I would be, and just, you would lift off at your feet and it's like you're off the ground, and then you just, he's not going down, you're not going down, and you're not going up. It's like, yeah, it's perfect. Whereas as a child in the class, when I would be bored of a class, you know, the teacher, whatever subject it was, and I would balance the pen, or a pencil rather. We were not allowed to use pen, you know, elementary. So you would hold the pencil on your finger, and once you would hold it, yay, it's like it's not falling. It's like that. To simplify it even further. All the 7 factors come to perfect balance. The moment that happens, there's Nibbana. That's what we see in the suttas. That's what we see in the practice of actual meditators. When the mind, on its own, it has trained itself so well that it can tweak on its own. You don't have to work on it anymore. You don't have to say, hey, is there too much virya? Okay, I need to back off a little bit. I need to put a little bit more passaddhi, or okay. Is there enough joy? One of the things that what I recommend people to do when you get bored or tired is bring up the joy factor, spiritual joy, and that is what's going to perk you up. Remind yourself. That's one of the reasons why I also insist on using metta in this retreat, because you will see these 7 factors at one point or another if you follow the instructions, without changing anything, without taking anything away or putting anything extra. And so Lord Buddha says that, and then this is Venerable Mahakassapa's response. They most certainly do lead one to direct understanding and to full awakening. Because remember, Venerable Mahakassapa was already an arahant who was sick. They most certainly do, O Blessed One, for they are the factors of awakening. Indeed, O fortunate, happy one, they are indeed the factors of awakening. You can almost sense the joy in him. This is what the Buddha said, and the Venerable Mahakassapa, being gladdened in his heart, delightedly approved of the words spoken by the Blessed One. Thereupon the Venerable Mahakassapa recovered from the sickness afflicting him, and the physical suffering that was the result of the Venerable Mahakassapa's illness simply disappeared. Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu. You know, I tried this because, you know, I've been a scientist, I've taught science for over a decade, so for me I function in a way where it's like, I have to test something to see if it's working or not. I learned that from my father as well. Not to believe anything blindly, to test it, to see it for myself, and then make, you know, my own conclusions. So one time I was extremely sick, fever, shaking. I never shaken, it was tremors, and in the body. And I had a friend who was staying over, and I said, could you please try this? Could you please recite to me the 7 factors of awakening? I got up after half an hour, and I was like, is this happening? Is this just, is it like some type of auto-hypnosis? Is this something like I'm faking, basically? I was up, and I've never felt those tremors again. Now I knew the Satta Bojjhangas, I remembered them, but hearing it from someone else suddenly did something that helped me get up. So that was my experience. So I'm just putting it out there because Lord Buddha put it out there 2,600 years ago. And it has to have had a significance for him and for the Arya Savakas, the Arahants, to have included it back to back in the Samyutta Nikaya for a reason. Perhaps they are inviting us to test it as well. See it, test it. Ehipassiko. Come, see for yourself. So I will pause here and see if there are any questions you might have.
Is it okay to repeat this one daily?
Yes, of course. Is it okay to repeat the Satta Bojjhangas daily? Is that what you were asking?
Yeah.
Yes, absolutely. Not just this group, any of the Noble Eightfold Path, but remember, the danger is always to turn it into some form of mantras. That's how rites and rituals show up. You know, there's just a ghost of its former self. That's what you will have if there are no person really trying to understand what these things stand for. I probably have mentioned how when I was a kid, I think it was my grandmother's or my auntie's house we used to go to. I was a child, and sometimes you would be hungry and you're looking around. We were not allowed to touch the refrigerator, anyone else's. But I would see this lovely dinner table, and on it there would be this fruit basket tray. And on it there would be these lovely looking fruits, different pears, apples, things, pomegranate. And then I would, when no one was looking, I would go reach for them, and suddenly, to my shock, surprise, the pomegranate was so light. The apple was so light. Felt funny. Yes. And I would see there's a hole, tiny hole, and then I would look carefully and I would see that it doesn't have the smell. In those days, fruits actually smelled like the fruit. Nowadays, it's all genetically most of the time. And I was like, what is this? It's somebody painted them to look like that. So if you just memorize even something as beautiful as the Satta Bojjhanga formula, it ends up to be nothing more than a fruit basket of fake fruits. But that's how you have most religions in the world. Nothing, but just there's no essence. That's why I keep insisting the Dhamma can only live, grow, sprout, develop in your heart. It's not going to do that in a book, in a sutta, in a temple. No. First and foremost, it will happen in your heart. This is not mystical talk. The truth of these principles can only be realized by you. Do you understand how much power you have? You have the power to sustain the Dhamma or to let it die. The teachings, that is. The Dhamma doesn't die. The Dhamma is the Dhamma. Whether there's a Buddha, there's Dhamma, there's Buddhism or not. The Buddha simply comes in the darkest of times to reveal it. That's the role of a Buddha, and teaches the Four Noble Truths. But the teachings, that's what I'm referring to as Dhamma, will disappear or will thrive and flourish thanks to what we do. That's why I highly commend you for doing retreats beyond the formality. Every time you're pushing through your ignorance, your status quo, you're trying to taste the Dhamma. So it's highly commendable. Yes?
Bhante, based on this sutta, from your point of view, how it healed Mahakassapa?
How can it heal?
How by bringing out this Satta Bojjhanga to Mahakassapa, who is actually an Arahant. Just now I actually want to ask, is it because he already Arahant, he already gone through this before, right? Before. But that is to the Arahant. When they chant to the Arahant, then maybe he was understand what it is chanted. So that, but to a normal people who don't only know, just like you say, maybe mantra, sati, Dhammavichaya, virya. So if they don't have a deep understanding on that, how can that illness be healed?
I'm not an arahant, you know.
No, that is why I want to ask you from your point of view.
No, I know. No, there's a follow-up to that. I shared something personal with you earlier about I wanted to test this to see if it worked. I'm not an arahant, but I knew the value of the Satta Bojjhangas. I have seen it in meditation. I have worked with them. I knew closely how to address a certain problem. For example, if laziness came in, I knew I was lacking in vidya. There's truth there. There's Dhamma there. Undeniable. Sandittiko, it's there. I can bet my life on it if you know, that phrase would be allowed for a bhikkhu to use. But it's so real. So I know it. It's unshakable. I'm not an arahant.
But you have an understanding of Dhamma.
Yes. So that is how I would address your question. So even though a person is not an arahant, that should not deprive us from the reality and the power of the truth that these 7 represent for the person. If one is putting in the necessary dedication to explore their authenticity, their experiential power. And that cannot be given by someone else. It can only be encouraged and inspired, as seen, as demonstrated by Lord Buddha. Him being an arahant, his student being an arahant. Still, Lord Buddha went to remind him. He knew very well. Because this was a question I was dealing with for years, like, how, like, was Venerable Mahakassapa an arahant without knowing the 7 factors of awakening? Which is a ridiculous idea. But no, just the recitation of it. Because when we don't know how or from what, because he was suffering, but it was a very difficult illness that he was going through. And if you've ever, I think all of us have been sick, and probably sick very bad at one point or another, it can really remove you from whatever you hold to be beautiful, valuable. If you've ever gotten a toothache, as if your whole being hangs from that tooth, everything else loses its importance. Or if you have a nail, a tiny little issue with your tiny little toe, pinky toe, but you've jammed it, or you've bruised it, everything is focused on that. So as you're going through those difficult times, the last thing probably you would do is, unless you're an arahant, but still you would have to deal with, I'm presuming here, with tremendous battle. That's why one of the things that many arahants did, if they had the ability to go into the jhanas like Lord Buddha, to go into the jhanas so you can detach yourself from the body. Okay? Otherwise, try it. Hopefully you won't get sick. That's my hope for you. But if you do, here's an example. But that doesn't mean that you should stay away from taking your medication that the doctor prescribed, you know. So just an idea. Yes, sir.
Bhante, so we should recite it in Pali or shall we recite it in English?
Very practical question, I would say. Whichever one sounds more close to you, like whichever one is less foreign to you. Now, I like to recite it in Pali, of course, but because they sound better to me than English. But I might use the English to remind that part of my brain to become more acclimated. Also, I recommend listening to suttas chanted, especially the Satta Bojjhanga Sutta, that you have lovely renditions by different bhikkhus who have beautiful voices. They chant So I recommend that too. You can have that play also in the background, by the way. But as long as you understand what each of these terms are. So, but it's a preference. That's what I'm trying to say with so many words. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, because if it's in Pali, most of us may not understand the words in Pali. But if it's recited in English, I think all of us would be able to do that.
Well, that's why I'm spending so much time today, especially going into the ins and outs of these terms in English, explaining it to you in English, but without forgetting the primacy of the Pali words. That's dangerous for us to just ignore the Pali. There are English translators of the suttas that take, creative freedoms with the Pali language, and they come up with their own words, left and right, without giving references. At least put them in parentheses, I said. There's one Ajahn in the US, who very, very well known, who translates suttas. I said, I really have to struggle when I read your renditions, your translations. And I'm a Dhamma teacher. I was a lay Dhamma teacher at the time, for many years. But I said, I have to struggle, but I know Pali, I understand. Even I have to struggle, let alone someone who's just coming to the path. What are they going to do? Especially because you go ahead and change your English translation of a certain word again and again, as you see fit. I said, please, Ajahn, could you put the Pali in parentheses in mid-sentence so somebody can have an idea what you mean by discernment? Because everywhere else it's translated as wisdom, panya I'm referring to. So we need to be very careful as translators also, not to damage the Pali. We damage the Pali when we just take liberties with the terms as we see fit without mentioning the Pali original term. That's a no-no, unacceptable, because that's going to confuse people and you might cause more harm than good.
Just a follow-up of the question by the sister. I just want to ask you, Bhante, when you were sick and your friend recited the Bojjhanga to you, what was going on in your mind at that time?
Oh, very good question. There was a lot of, I guess the term would be rootless. Not ruthless, but rootless. Not having any roots. Disconnected. It was disarray. Because I was in physical pain, but the mind was also all over the place. I didn't know, should I call 911? 911 is our version of calling the ambulance, paramedics. I didn't know what was going on. And I was freezing even though it wasn't that cold. And so, but the mind was very restless. And almost like if you've seen in movies where you go through an electromagnetically charged environment where your compass doesn't detect the North Star. It's spinning, like you're almost stepped into like Bermuda Triangle or something. The mind was doing something like that. And so that was where I was. So I was nowhere. But hearing the words, it became more settling. And the heart settled. And there was, a saddha was the thing to even suggest for my friend to come and recite. But even saddha grew at that time. Just to put you in that moment, as best as I can remember. Does that answer your question? Okay. And then you just first there.
Bhante, I would like to know, in order to come to this visual, how many suttas that Bhante explore? How many? Because if I just read this sutta, right, it's really words only. Very difficult to get the meaning. How do we do this research into this more?
Why?
So that, because this is very relatable to me.
Okay, use this.
Yes, but
Why? I've done the work for you.
yes, but there are other things that I would like to research too.
That's fine. You have the whole suttas, 84,000 teachings. Go have fun. But what I'm saying is, you already have a lot in this. So tone down your curious mind, because otherwise you might spend, or waste rather, the rest of your life exploring and you will never find the end. So I don't care how many suttas I've looked into. Thousands, yes. But who cares? In the Dhammapada, Lord Buddha is very clear. He says, a person might have recited or learned countless suttas, but doesn't know even what a single verse stands for. They don't know how to apply it. It's just silly, it's just stupid, it's a waste. On the other hand, he says, a person who just knows a single verse, just a little, even half of a verse, that's enough. Otherwise, you would be just accumulating, and your head is going to get heavier and heavier and heavier. A waste of a beautiful life that you could spend digging through this, because this is just a formula, tools for you to apply now. Otherwise, it's like giving someone a shovel and a hoe and saying, dig now, here, under you, there is a mountain of gold. The person goes and holds on to the shovel and says, well, wait a minute. This is brilliant. This shovel looks beautiful. This looks durable. Let me go ahead and explore other kinds of shovels, etc., etc. Because that would mean completely missing the boat. But if you're curious, the suttas are always there. As I mentioned, the Bojjhanga section, Samyutta, Bojjhanga Samyutta in the Samyutta Nikaya is replete, is full of references to this. But you don't have to. In order for you to cut a tomato, you don't have to have the whole selection of knives. You just need one. And if you're a real good chef, you just need one knife to do all the kinds of work. You don't.
Yes, if I know that that knife is the right knife.
Oh, you don't know this isn't the right?
To come to this, I couldn't have come to this if without you explaining.
Okay.
So
Can you apply it though?
Yes, it was very
that's what
relatable.
matters. That's what matters. This is a map. This is a map. You need to follow the map. You don't need to go exploring other maps. This is where you need to recalibrate your trajectory. What is it that you really want? Because obviously you have some curious mind there going, working.
Yes, a simple thing like PT, the meaning of PT.
Do you know the meaning? I explained it. Do you know now?
Says joy, but
Spiritual
what joy? You see, for me, PT is like joy, but what type of joy? What does this joy means? I like to go into...
That's fine. So you can research it in the suttas. I spent a long time writing that book, which is available for you for free, that the BMV actually generously published for you. Use it. I've done the work. I've done the legwork for you. Apply it and know what it tastes like. Not think about what could it mean. These are not things intellectual. These are things to be tasted, practiced by you, so you know personally through experience. That's Dhamma. Otherwise, it's just mental jargon. I call it mental acrobatics. Useless use of the body, the mind, a life. Remember, this morning I was saying your biggest asset is time. Don't waste it. As you're researching, let's say, Bojjhangas, and you get to the third or fourth volume. But you still, I guarantee it, you still have no clue what they are if you've not been practicing. And if you have been practicing, you won't need to go through those books. But if you're curious, you want to, go ahead. But what if you lose your life in the midst of that research? There goes another life. So use your time wisely. That would be Lord Buddha's suggestion, I would believe, given the thousands of suttas that I've read and translated.
It seems to me this state is something like the first jhana to the fourth jhana. Because you see, in jhanic state, piti is in.
Not everywhere, just the first and second.
Yeah. But upekkha, I remember it was on the fourth jhana.
No. Upekkha is there, but the intensity of the joy, the awareness of pain and pleasure, the mind is still too agitated to detect the presence of upekkha. Upekkha is there. As the mind is settling down, the joy slowly dissipates. Now what's happening, as it dissipates, what is becoming more abundantly clear?
Upekkha.
Exactly. Until you have the predominance of upekkha in the mind. That's why even vitakka vichara, thinking and planning, pondering, becomes like a thorn in your side in the second jhana. Because every time you're going higher and higher and your thoughts come in, kick in, and you're like, oops, I'm out. You know, you can tell the difference in texture, if you will. There's more joy, but you have more thinking, and then you're out of the second and first jhana suddenly, because now you're regretting. But you seem to have more a follow-up question. Go ahead.
You see, Bhante, this Vijaya, this Dhammavichaya is the. You see, if you have Dhammavichaya is investigation, correct? Okay, if you have investigation, I think it's difficult to have samadhi. I don't know.
If you have Dhammavichaya, your question is,
Yes.
then how can you have samadhi? Because it's action. It's
No. You see, what I'm trying to say is something comes up. Say you sense it, okay? See, now I'm doing Kayagata Sati. Something comes up and I can sense it. Straight away I go there, right?
Goes where?
Goes to where, say, the sensation is there, feeling or maybe a thought. It comes out, samadhi already gone, right?
Not necessarily.
Not necessary.
If it is on a mundane level, the samadhi, that is, if your samadhi is well established, if you've done it enough times, if you've gone in and out, in and out, in and out, in and out, you have gotten used to it. That's one of the things which we encourage students to do, to learn how to go in and out of jhanas, the first, and back to the second, first, time it. You're becoming more accustomed, training yourself in it. So you're able to settle and become more comfortable in the samadhi, to the point where you don't even have to be in closing your eyes to experience samadhi. I've had teachers in the past who would say, in order for you to be in samadhi, you need to be in seated position. You have to be, sitting down. That's not true. You can be in the first, second, third, fourth, fifth, sixth jhanas, experiencing samadhi of the finest levels while walking around. So your samadhi is so comfortably settled and established, it really doesn't matter. You don't have to have your eyes closed, basically. So what then can we say about the Dhammavichaya? So what it is then your samadhi is so well tuned that whatever happens, you're able to see it. And you're practicing vipassana. You're seeing things as they are. The wisdom of Venerable Sariputta did not diminish when he was talking, when he was walking, when he was eating, when he was on Pindapada. So oftentimes people think there is, you are less than compared to sitting, for example, compared to walking. Not necessarily. After all that you are accruing, all that you are tasting, all that you're cultivating while you're sitting down in meditation on retreat are things to be demonstrable. They need to be demonstrated to some degree, at least for your awareness, while you're engaged with life. So I've seen too many teachers in the past who separate samadhi and turn this into like this otherworldly thing. Don't get me wrong, it's quite sublime compared to the mundane, but it's not supposed to just stay there. You can bring samadhi while washing the dishes. I encourage meditating students, when you get that moment of upekkha or passaddhi come in and just knocking on your door, in order for you to go deeper, I encourage them, if you can, put down the washing, dry your hands, go sit a little bit. Because that's an invitation for you to go deeper. But the person was experiencing samadhi, sometimes of the finest caliber that they've ever experienced. Am I able to answer your question?
Yeah, I understand now. Yeah.
Okay,
Thank
good.
you, thank you.
Hi, Bhante. This 7 factors of enlightenment here, there's 2, piti and upekkha is mentioned here, and it's also mentioned in the 4 Brahma Vihara. May I know how is it connected, piti and upekkha?
Well, piti is not mentioned as a separate Brahma Vihara. Upekkha is.
Upekkha, sorry. Yeah, upekkha. How is it connected with...
One of the problems that many individuals exploring the Dhamma, studying the Dhamma, encounter is a clash in their way of thinking and how the Dhamma is organized. I resemble it to, let's say, trying to study Sanskrit literature and comparing it with the grammatical structures of the language of Swahili. They don't work. There's no connection, to my knowledge anyhow. So the reason why I bring this up is because many of us are think in very linear fashion. A, after A there's B, after that is C, etc. So that's linear fashion. Similarly, yesterday someone was asking about paticcasamuppada, craving, I think. When you put them in compartments, saying this has to happen first in this way, and that's it. If it's not, I've had students who would come and argue with, well, why is that? Well, that's why I mentioned how in the paticcasamuppada, depending on when Lord Buddha spoke to whom, which crowd, which level of understanding, he used different formulations. So you have upekkha here, but the brain wants to know some very definitive, measurable, compartmentalized way of looking and finding a direct correlation into the usage of here, upekkha, in relation to upekkha as one of the Brahma Viharas. That is a mental negative habit that we have, which we have to break. That is very left-brained way of thinking, I've discovered. Instead, I invite you to use a more of a right brain attitude, meaning looking at the relationships. What do I mean by that? This is again my experience of it. Another teacher might say something different, but we both have to agree on the Dhammic principles. We must. Otherwise, we're talking about personal viewpoints. Ditti, which is wrong ditti, compared to Sammaditthi. So, Upekkha, what is the quality of Upekkha? Do you have any ideas?
Like equanimity, calmness, tranquility.
Well, it has those qualities. Remember, tranquility, calmness are passaddhi you're referring to. But it is not lifeless. The closest to wisdom in this 7 factors is upekkha. It is the master of all. Without upekkha, there cannot be the experience of realization, period. That's why Lord Buddha placed it there. In fact, even when I encourage you to do metta practice, there must come a time where you tap into the experiencing of upekkha. It's not just radiating metta, loving kindness. It's a step-by-step process. Remember, metta is part of a 4, I call them brothers and sisters, siblings. Because as you're working with metta, suddenly, eventually, as you're progressing, as you're following directions from your teacher, guess what happens? Suddenly metta transforms itself without asking for your permission to karuna. And you have this tremendous compassion towards beings. You don't see a separation. As if that's not enough, suddenly you have this tremendous altruistic joy towards someone else. You go to a job interview with someone else. You have worked so hard to get this job, to nail that interview. Even though you have the qualifications, they get the job. But if the person, in that case, you have mudita, which is the 3rd of the Brahma Viharas, if it is glowing inside of you, it is like you have gotten the job yourself. Isn't that beautiful? That is otherworldly. That's why the Devas love that. That's why they're called the Brahma Viharas. But we don't stop there. It quickly transitions into upekkha. You're going in and out, just like in the jhanas. You're going in and out of upekkha because the mind, because of our propensity in samsara, in living in delusion, in sankharas, being the victim of our sankharas, the mind, it's too shocking for the mind to drop into upekkha. It doesn't work like that. So you need to acclimate. It's like going from a warm environment and jumping into a pool of cold, icy cold water. It's going to shock you. So you acclimate, you go in, out, a little bit here, a little bit, more lukewarm. So that's what's happening. So if you look at it like that, because by the way, the jhanas are also happening here. All right? But not 100% of the time, because there are individuals who don't experience the jhanas, but nevertheless experience nibbana. Okay? But these factors have to be there, because the mind has to be calm. One of the things that Lord Buddha says in the Anguttara Nikaya, book of the 5s, where Lord Buddha is listing the ways that a person can become awakened, realized, experience Nibbana. The first of it is what I try to remind you of again and again and again. Through listening. Through listening. Can you calm the mind in such a way? Can you relinquish your analytical thinking, your hang-ups? Can you really let them out the door? Just when you walk in, come in with fresh ears. Listen with your heart to the words of Lord Buddha. Can you do that? If you're doing it very well, these Satta Bojjhangas are going to line up perfectly. There are many, 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 many people, countless people, who have attained Jnana Dassana. At the very least, the first stage of awakening simply by listening, without going into any jhana. Some of them even attained arahantship. Am I in the ballpark of answering your question?
Thank you, Bhante.
Okay. We had still questions downstairs, huh? I think I need a break. Sukhihotu.